All right, here's our recording. So let's talk about sexual orientation. I think that this is such an important topic because there are very real consequences right now to what people's attitudes towards same-sex attraction are. And so sexual orientation is very boring if you just talk about heterosexuality, attraction to the opposite sex, because that is the vast majority of people who exist. However, the number of people who have same-sex attraction has not only always been appreciable and it's always been around, it's actually growing, or at least the number of people who are comfortable enough to identify as something closer to bisexual is increasing. We've gone from something like between 3 and 5% of the population reporting some same-sex attraction to something like 20 to 25% of all people. I mean, that is a huge jump if you consider how many people in the world are in the world and how many people are. A lot of these stats come from the United States and Europe, where it's easiest to survey these things. But there's an entire portion of the world where it's illegal to express anything other than opposite sex attraction. There are countries that still legislate against it. So I think it's really important to understand the characteristics of sexual orientation, which is what we covered this past week. And then next week, I've uploaded a video describing some of the current theories, describing why does variation, why do people differ in their sexual orientation? And what are some of the possible causes? So let's focus on that first part, just the characteristics. I guess, I don't know, Zypher, was there anything that surprised you? Did you get a chance to, I mean, was there anything about the content from this week that surprised you in terms of sexual orientation?
Definitely, it was the amount of bisexuals over homosexuals. I didn't realize that homosexuality was so low.
Yeah. Yeah, at least exclusive homosexuality, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And secondly, from what I got from the graph, probably doesn't describe what it actually meant, but it looked like the older you got, the more likely you were to be straight. But I think that's just because showing the older generations and how they repressed homosexuality, they then repress it themselves now.
Right. And that's my interpretation too, that it's not that as you get older, you get straighter. There's not very good evidence to suggest that. This is more, it seems, older populations. I mean, the culture used to be, you didn't share this information. You didn't make it public, right? Don't ask, don't tell. I'm not going to ask you about your sexual orientation, but I also don't want to know about it. So keep it to yourself and just do the predominant thing, identify as heterosexual, and then everyone will get along, right? So I think that that's just that's a reflection of the cultural change. Whereas now we are much more accepting of same-sex attraction, and this is my bias, and I think that it's a rightful bias. I think it's good that that has happened. I think that same-sex attraction is something that I have not yet seen a good argument for why we should be restricting people's sexual attractions, really at all, but even to the same sex. And I think that there are those who would want that. And so I don't know if you have thoughts on that I mean, what really motivates someone who is against homosexuality to really say this is something we should create laws against? We should discourage this. Is there any justification for that perspective that you've ever heard?
The biggest thing I heard is because it's against my religion, or it's against God, or it's a sin, or blah, 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 this and that and the other. But at the same time, that's to be easily debunked by saying that homosexual and gay has never appeared in the Bible, other than meaning happy, at all until 1940s, when the word which originally meant pedophile was translated to homosexual.
Oh, interesting. I never heard of that. So
it's true though.
I I'd heard that the original instantiations of the Bible did not include information about homosexuality, but I didn't realize that it was so recently that
The
that
guy's
language was.
still alive. The guy who fucking translated it to say
Mm,
homosexual, thou should not be homosexual, whatever the quote was, is still
mhm.
alive today. He got interviewed as to why he did it.
Interesting. I actually need to look into that.
Although that what I'm referring to is 2018 documentaries on it. I can't quite remember. He might have died recently, but he was still alive. Is the point?
Right, right. Yeah, and you know, this is funny. I think a lot of sexual minority orientations tend to get grouped together in a way. I think people in their mind, for one reason or another, tend to group together homosexuality with pedophilia, with sexual promiscuity, with
Rape.
with rape, sexual coercion, sexual assault, things like that. With disease as well, so spreading STIs. And you know, one of the details that I think is important to understand is that um, the AIDS epidemic, which is really something that hit national news in the 1980s or so, when it was really like the pandemic of the time, was characterized as being spread by gay men, and to some degree that was true, whereby gay men are more likely than other groups, heterosexual men and women and homosexual women, to have casual sex and to have lots and lots and lots of sexual partners. But I think that there was this kind of, so once that was announced, what you saw within the gay community is there was an explosion of safe sex practices. People didn't want to get AIDS. And so, yes, gay men were more likely to have it. However, there was already this kind of muddying of the waters where people started to say, oh, it must be homosexuality that gave rise to the disease itself, rather than, okay, maybe the unrestricted sociosexuality of gay men spread it, but it wasn't the unrestricted sociosexuality that created it. So I feel like a lot of people in their minds almost associate gay sex with creating disease, which is not the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that accurately portrays the attitudes against homosexuality, but that is how it has always come across to me. Is that it's like you know, if you take it from the religious standpoint, it's almost, this is the source of evil, right? And all sources of evil we should be getting rid of in one way or another. And I think that what you tend to see is that homosexual behavior, same, you know, casual sex among gay men, can be a vector by which, say, something like disease gets spread, but in and of itself is not an inherently evil thing, or does not inherently cause problems within society. I think there's a distinction that needs to be drawn there, and it's not well drawn for a lot of people. Yeah, I guess we didn't talk too much about stigma.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that stigma would definitely be another part of the inherent hatred towards other sexualities like that. I forgot the original argument because I'm ADHD. But yeah, the same argument as before. Stigma could also be an answer to it, because it could be seen as a way to spread disease.
Right. Yep. So I think that society it's reckoning with this right now, and I think that people are realizing that you know, same-sex attraction in and of itself doesn't cause problems. It's just that there may be some unique characteristics, such as, you know, when you have two men together and they both want casual sex is going to happen more often, and it might happen more freely without protection. But as soon as you impose this kind of like tradition of, oh, you need to use sexual protection and you make condoms widely available, what you're doing is you're getting rid of that problem. And thus, lots of casual sex really isn't a problem anymore, as long as you're taking the right precautions. So yeah, that chart that you mentioned, yeah, it's a very interesting chart, because I I think that people are more likely to express same-sex attraction because it's becoming more socially acceptable. I haven't seen good arguments that say people get straighter as they get older. In fact, if anything, I've actually seen the opposite, whereby you see that once people get back past their reproductive prime, they've actually had children, and then the children leave the house and they are freed for the first time in 18 or more years to do whatever they want. They then start to say, you know what, I'm established in society. I don't have to really care what other people think of me anymore. Now I'm freer to actually act on any same-sex attraction that I may have. And you do tend to see that, where, especially among men, is men are more willing to act on their same-sex attraction once they don't really care what other people think. Yeah.
I've definitely seen that, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, I've seen that in a more physical sense.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually talking with someone online at some point. Later, I found out that he was like in his 50s or something like that, but we still talked. And he was telling me how well he had a wife. He was happily married for a long time. He had children, had grandchildren, and and he was always homosexual. He did it firstly because of the stigma at the time. Seeing that homosexuals are now no longer being to be in hiding, he started being open about his own sexuality.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, another argument that I've heard for, wanting to dissuade people from acting on same-sex attraction is, certainly if you are mating with someone of the same sex, you're not going to be able to reproduce with them, right? And so one could argue, oh, to the degree that people who have same-sex attractions are almost coerced, or not forced, but like pushed towards having sexual relationships with someone of the opposite sex, that's going to produce children. And on average, society benefits from having more children in it. And so it's almost like maybe traditionally same-sex attraction was discouraged so that people would have children. But as the world population gets larger and there are more people and there's overpopulation in some areas, I think that there's an argument to be made that we shouldn't be encouraging people to have children anymore. In fact, if you are attracted to the same sex and there is less of a risk of you having children, that's actually a good thing. It's a moral good in some places.
I just thought of a fun argument for homosexual partnership to argue against people who are like, but it's against my religion or something like that, or homosexuality is wrong. It's like, hey, I'm just helping with overpopulation.
I think that's good. I think that if you can express that to someone, it would send them for a spin and be like, wait a second, how can I really follow it that way? No, I think that's great. I think that's great. Yeah. I think that a lot of stigma comes from traditional belief. It comes from probably a set of beliefs that for a very long time may have actually helped societies. If people are encouraged to mate with someone of the opposite sex, for most of human history, there was not some crazy amount of overpopulation. So to get people to reproduce more, great idea. To reduce the chance that disease might spread, great idea. But now we have modern interventions for these problems, right? We have effective birth control. We have condoms that are good at protecting against sexually transmitted disease. So we don't really need these like heavy-handed, we don't need this heavy-handed condemnation or stigmatization to get people to do the right thing. Now we can just say, here's a condom, right? Have safe sex. Yeah. So what discussion questions do you happen to have? I can start looking into some of the other discussion questions that people have too.
Probably would have had some if I wasn't too busy cleaning. But I'll grab my composition book right now and write them down as they come, and we'll just answer other people's questions right now.
So there's a Oh, these are interesting questions. Do women have more accurate gaydar than men? So just to clarify, gaydar, I mentioned it in the lecture, gaydar is the ability to accurately guess someone's sexual orientation from zero acquaintance. That is, you know nothing about them. You just look at them and, oh, you look gay. That's actually
I
seems
just
to be a
love the
thing.
term, though.
What's that?
I just love the term, though.
Yeah. No, it's creative. It's nice. But why do you think gaydar exists? I mean, what is it that cues you off that someone might be gay?
Well, originally, I think the original intent was so that Chad males could be like, oh, yeah, no, he's gay. You should date me instead.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think what it's turned into is because gay and homosexual men would like to I might lose power soon. Would like to
I
express.
might lose power. Mine's flickering too, so if we cut out, you're not alone.
But yeah, I'm thinking since homosexuals like to express themselves more flamboyantly, I think is the word. And you know, have their nice, obviously gay clothing, colorfulness. Some of them will even put on rainbow-like stuff, or you might even get guys who like talk like this and stuff. It's like, oh my God, Becky. You know, could be more of a use of telling the straight people that they are gay, so that they can be more obvious for gay people to find them. So I think it's kind of turned into a real thing for the sake of, because homosexuals are no longer as hated as they once were, they're able to express themselves more and get a partner that they like. So I think that's mostly what it is. Almost like...
Huh? No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, almost like how in nature, like the poisonous dart frog has super colorful textures to ward off predators. Of course, that doesn't mean ward off sexual partners. Still, it's sort of a similar motive there. I'm obviously gay, so that straight man isn't going to be attracted to me. And if I notice that he is not he doesn't show any attraction, then I'm not going to go for him. So
right, and yeah, I think that's very much right. And signaling to other people, I do think is part of this. And I think you can kind of consciously signal if you decide to wear certain types of makeup, and it doesn't have to be flamboyant, right? It could be very subtle. It could be that if you put a bit of eye makeup on as a man, other, say, gay men may notice that, whereas heterosexual men who barely probably even notice makeup in the first place are going to overlook it. So I suspect to some degree some of the cues that people pick up on may come from the tradition of when, as same-sex attraction was stigmatized, and it still is, but was even more strongly stigmatized, it would have been very risky to publicly announce, hey, I'm gay, who else here is gay? So instead, you have to subtly cue that you are gay, right? You have to make it obvious enough for other gay men or other gay individuals to notice you, but not so flamboyant that people would be able to then recognize and discriminate against you. So I feel like the subtlety of it might come down to that. I think the other part of it, though, is if you look at how, say, especially drag shows are put on, or when you think of kind of the flamboyant gay male, it's what that flamboyance comes from is kind of an embodiment of female typical traits. When you have that lispy kind of voice, it sounds more female typical. Usually it's higher pitched. And if you wear flamboyant clothing, flamboyant really just usually means it's gender atypical. It's more female than it is male. Therefore, it becomes flamboyant and show-offy. And we know from our previous classes that same-sex attraction, that attraction to people of the same sex, is a gender atypical trait. So men who are attracted to men have a female typical pattern of attraction. So I think what a lot of gaydar might be is, beyond the subtle signals that can be intentional, it might be that man actually looks a bit more feminine. They behave more femininely because their psychology, their biology may actually be somewhat more female typical. And so what you're picking up on are just female typical traits on a man. I don't know if that makes sense, but to the extent that gay men are more female typical, and there is evidence of that, then what gaydar might be is you're picking up on female typical traits in men, and therefore assuming, maybe that means they're gay. Now, it doesn't always mean they're gay, and so that's the thing about gaydar, is that sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, but on average, you tend to be able to tell, above chance anyway. So if a male has female typical traits, he may have same-sex attractions as well. The original question here, though, was, do women have better gaydar than men? And I think that's a very interesting question, because I don't know evidence of this. I've not seen a study on this, but I would guess that that's actually correct.
I mean,
what we do know. So go ahead.
I would say yes too, because well, not only are girls more open to each other than guys are, I just have a feeling that it would be much more, more or less noticeable. And it probably comes from the whole idea that girls actually do notice your clothing, either straight or not, and just the style of your clothing, like we were saying for guys, could be just so subtly different. To like, okay, just like immediately, just because they're not wearing a dress or something.
Right. Yeah, and what we learned in a previous lecture is that women are also more sensitive to social cues overall. So not only do women tend to process facial information more accurately than men do and more quickly than men do, but you're right, they'll tend to, say, accurately identify when there's conflict between someone, when there is sexual attraction between some people. So it's possible that women are kind of picking up on things that men don't typically pick up on, such as the female typical traits that the man has, but then also she may be picking up on if that man is attracted to someone else and that someone else is a man. So if you might notice that, okay, that guy is attracted, seems to be interested in this other guy, and therefore you're going to have a more accurate guess of, are they gay or not? Yeah. I think that's actually a correct observation, but I've never seen it tested. I would love to see it tested, though. That's a great question.
Probably run an online experiment.
Oh, sure.
I wouldn't know how to do it though, but I might. But I'm on a lesbian group on chat, and I could probably just send them in like a survey or something they could fill out. Now get the gay side of things, but there are still a few straight women in it who are just supportive. So I don't know.
Yeah, you get a good sample. Well,
just go around town.
You've got to design an experiment for your paper, so that could very well be an experiment that you design. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Think about it.
I'll write a note on it. Hold on, right now. I'll write a note on it right now.
If lesbians have better mental rotation skills, are lesbians more likely to be car repair workers and jobs like that, and less likely to have the more nurturing jobs like heterosexual women, and same for men? Yeah, absolutely. That we do know. Often, homosexual women, homosexual men will on average be more likely to adopt gender atypical jobs. They'll have hobbies that are more gender atypical. Just overall, psychological functioning, preference, things like that are going to resemble the opposite sex more than the same sex. Certainly, so this is complicated because it sounds like lesbians are like men. In a way, that's true, but it's more complicated than that, because lesbians are still often women, right? And we can get into the territory of being genderqueer and all that. But if we think about just stereotypical, you are born, you have the anatomy and the physiology of a woman, but you are also a lesbian, you have same-sex attraction. What that looks like is you are on average going to be female typical because overall you are more like a woman. However, compared to heterosexual women, you're going to be more masculine. So you'll probably be less masculine than a man, but more masculine than a heterosexual woman. So there's a space in between that a lesbian may occupy. So we have to remember to think of gender on a continuum, where it's not you're a male or a female, and say if you're a lesbian, that makes you more like a man. I mean, it makes you more like a man typically, on average, but you may still be more female typical than you are male typical as a lesbian. And often you will be. Great question. Let's see. Hmm.
Sudden silence.
No, I'm sorry. I'm looking for some discussion questions, but
Can't think of any myself actually at the moment.
not entirely clear. Do lesbians and gay men have a shorter lifespan? From what I'm aware, no, they don't. But I actually don't for sure know the answer to that. So here's what I will say. My guess is that in societies where homosexuality is accepted, I wouldn't expect to see a difference in the lifespan of heterosexual versus homosexual men and women. However, in societies where same-sex attraction is highly stigmatized, stigma does have a real effect on people's life outcomes. So if someone is, I mean, if you're homosexual, if you're a homosexual man in, say, sub-Saharan Africa, that can very much translate into a death sentence. You can be persecuted for that. And that persecution could very well lead to an earlier death for you. So it's possible that they do have shorter lifespans if you look at it across the globe. But I don't expect that the same-sex attraction itself is causing a shorter lifespan as much as the stigma, the pressure from other people that would cause that shorter lifespan, if that makes sense. This is a very interesting question. I'm tempted to look up evidence of this right now. I mean, just from a quick glance at a fairly large study by Susan Cochran and Vicky Mays, this is published in the American Journal of Public Health, which is a fairly reputable journal. There is a higher incidence of HIV-related causes of death, but other mortality risks, other causes of death, not so much. So it seems like, again, when there is this kind of leftover prevalence of say, disease within the homosexual community, and you are going to see death because of that. But because of same-sex attraction itself, I don't know. I'd have to look more into this. That's a great question, though. Do lesbians and gay men take the same hormone medication? Well, so again, being lesbian or gay does not mean that you are transitioning or that you are trans. This is specifically referring to sexual orientation. So they aren't necessarily taking hormones. Those who are taking hormones, you would probably see different types. If you are, say, a woman transitioning into who would want to transition into a man, you're going to take androgens and possibly estrogen blockers. Versus if you are a man wanting to transition into a woman, you'll take estrogen, or you'll take estrogen and then also take androgen blockers to block the action of testosterone, which would masculinize you. Very good questions. Let's see. Are lesbians more likely to have sex since they cannot get pregnant with their partners? I think that that's a very good prediction, because anxiety about sex is a big reason for a lot of women to be turned off to sex. Men and women's sex drive does differ, but the fear of something happening as a consequence of having sex for women is much greater. So there's this aspect of sex drive within women that seems to be inhibited by the risks, by the potential costs of it. So would you see lesbians having more sex? I don't know the answer to that either. These are all excellent questions. Do lesbians have more sex than heterosexual women? One thing that's going to factor into that is because lesbians are, on average, more masculinized. The more masculinized lesbians, I do know this, the kind of butch lesbians as opposed to femme lesbians do tend to have a higher sex drive. And they're more interested in casual sex. Again, they're more male typical. However, overall, do all lesbians tend to have more sex? I do not know the answer to that. I would guess yes, but I would need to look into that. All right, got anything written down that you want to throw out there, Cypher?
Nothing. I don't know. It's odd for me not to have any questions.
Let's see. So I kind of want to throw this question out, just not that I know the answer to it, and not that you will either. But there's the argument that I've seen made that really every single person is to some degree bisexual. And the only reason that anyone would not express some amount of same-sex attraction is probably because of stigma, is probably because of something inhibiting them from doing so. And I don't know what your impressions are about this. I mean, do you think that if people are changing across time such that as you see same-sex attraction is becoming more kind of socially accepted, do you think that over time, really everyone eventually is going to identify as bisexual?
Unlikely.
What do you think of that? Does that have merit?
No, I don't think that would have any merit. I mean,
That everyone is really by default bisexual?
And I think that we might just all balance out as stigma goes away, to where it might be more of a 50-50 split amongst all, if not like a 75-33 split or something like that.
I don't know if I see that happening. I do think that there is a very real biological basis that even regardless of culture, regardless of society, you're not going to see an even split of everyone. That we're going to be kind of set up a certain way.
Like I
Because
said,
again, as you've seen, for example, social stigma against exclusive homosexuality has started to go away. There's still basically the same number of homosexual individuals. So that seems to be pretty stable.
like I said,
So I don't know if
probably
we're
going
yeah.
more of a, there's still a dominant shift towards straight couples than any homosexual or bi. But I feel like the numbers might still be rising slightly, but we'll still stay in the minority.
Right, right. Yeah, there does seem to be something. I mean, we'll talk about this in the upcoming lecture, but there's this theory that so for most explanations, people assume that heterosexuality is the norm, that is how people have been for not only most of written human history, but for most of our evolutionary history as well. But there are people who are beginning to make the argument that perhaps the default was actually bisexuality. The default was attraction to everyone. And the argument there is attraction not only serves reproduction, it serves getting along with other people. When you form a romantic or sexual relationship with someone, you often feel connected to them in some way. And so same-sex attraction may actually serve the purpose of building social bonds. So rather than say attraction, the source of attraction being necessarily reproduction, it was simply the building of social bonds between individuals. And I don't know how much I buy into it, but I see it as reasonable, at least a reasonable hypothesis that we are all by default bisexual, and that people have really heterosexuality is just kind of it's the dominant strategy because it always led to reproduction. So as soon as this trait of exclusive heterosexuality came along, people were no longer spending effort on relationships that wouldn't lead to a child. And so many generations go by, and now you have mostly heterosexual people. So I see the possibility of that explanation of everyone kind of as by default being bisexual. But I'm not convinced of it. Let's see. Do lesbians and non-lesbians differ in things like depression, stress, and anxiety? You tend to see that susceptibility to depression and anxiety is a sex differentiated trait. Women suffer from these things far more than men do. To the degree that lesbians tend to be more masculine, I would expect that they actually might have a greater resistance to developing these kinds of specifically disorders, depressive and anxiety disorders. Again, based on the prediction that they would be more masculine. That's what I would expect. Okay. Some of these questions are about stigma. We've kind of hit on that already. We kind of started out with that. I think I've said as much as I care to say about why homosexual and bisexual men are targeted so much by society. I guess one thing we didn't talk about is, why do you think there's a distinction between, I mean, homosexual men, I think, and bisexual men get the brunt of it, that there is more stigma against homosexual men than there is against homosexual women. Why do you think that's the case? Do you have you ever thought about this?
Sorry, what?
Why do you think that homosexual men tend to suffer more stigma than homosexual women? Same-sex attraction between women, it's almost, in some places, in a lot of places, people are just like, oh, that's fine. Women making out with a girl, great, good times. Whereas, sexual attraction between men, people have a far stronger response to that.
I honestly just feel like it's because very rude people. Toxic masculinity could be a part of it, but the most part is because porn. People, most, if you actually look it up, there's actually several charts on it. The most searched for category on Pornhub is lesbian among the southern states as well as in the northeastern or northwestern, I mean, states. And the most searched thing is lesbian, and it's because, well, since porn is mostly advertised towards straight men, having lesbian being up there is not because they're lesbians, it's because they're two women. I'm attracted to women. Let me watch them do their thing so that I can get off because I'm only attracted to women. And that's probably where it comes from, in the sense that they had to create Pornhub's lesbian category to real life women or real life lesbians, and are fine with them because they most likely want to watch.
Mm-hmm. In my mind, I think my voice is coming through your speaker. In my mind, that helps to explain why especially men wouldn't be disgusted by lesbians, because I guess the ultimate fantasy for every, at least, maybe not just straight guys, but the ultimate fantasy for guys is to have multiple sexual partners, potentially at the same time, right? And so kind of lesbian women kind of create this opportunity where you think, oh man, well, there's two women, they're attracted to each other. If I can just get one of them attracted to me, then they'll both be attracted to me. That's not really how it happens, but I think that's at least the fantasy. And so I get that exists, but why? I guess the real question is, why is there such a strong disgust or a strong aversion to men? Because I don't think it's just, oh yeah, I'm not attracted to men, therefore I don't really want, not only don't want one guy, I don't want two men, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's actually a disgust response whereby men will go, oh, I can't even look at that. Like, that's just so disgusting to me. And so what we have to explain here is why does that response exist? Not why are women favored, but why are two men actually disfavored? Why have such a strong disgust response to that? I think that for a very long time, I had that response too. And I think that that's actually changed. I think that I no longer find two men kissing a disgusting thing. But for a long time, I felt that, where I was just like, I don't really want to see this. I wasn't about to say, this shouldn't be around, this shouldn't be here because I think it's disgusting. But I was just like, you know what, I don't really want to look at that right now, and so I won't. And it really has been with experience of seeing it more and it becoming more acceptable that I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I can as much as I'm not disgusted by, say, public displays of affection in general, just seeing two people kiss in public, I'm not really disgusted by it anymore. So I had this I feel like it didn't have a lot to do with my it didn't feel like it had a lot to do with my personal beliefs. I've never really been the person to say, I think homosexual people shouldn't allowed to be in a relationship, shouldn't be allowed to get married, shouldn't be kissing in public. But I at least had this, like, it felt like an innate, almost biological response, but maybe it wasn't. I really don't know I don't know quite how to explain that experience. I think anyone who a lot of people who have explained this to, you know, have explained it back to me as this has just been your attitude. This is your own stigma. This is your own negative beliefs towards people who are homosexual men. But to me, it never felt like it was about the belief. It was really about, I had a very, like, reflexively difficult time watching two men kiss. So I've never really solved that. I don't think. It has gotten weaker over time, but I don't know. I guess this is a question to ask people who have that reflexive kind of disgust response, and I don't know if I'm alone in that. If you're talking, your mic is muted, remember.
With that, but I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, you weren't saying anything. Okay. Gotcha. I don't know. I don't know if that's I don't know if all that made sense, but the question still remains: what is the source of that dislike? What is the source of that disgust?
Like I said,
Why?
it's probably because most straight men have the fantasy of being with two women, and therefore, two women being together is sexually appealing to them.
Again, that does make sense of why we favor two women over men, but I'm specifically focusing on why I feel disgust toward two men. So of course the men are not going to be attracted to a guy, a heterosexual man will not be attracted to two men. Sure, but why be disgusted by two men?
Like I said,
You know,
I was getting to that.
okay,
And
sorry.
the disgust towards the men is because you're not sexually attracted to them, so therefore you're disgusted by it.
Mm. So maybe you're just amplifying the disgust you would already feel. Since you already feel disgust towards one man, then add two together and it's worse. I guess. I wonder if that really, I mean, why then, though, would I want to discourage other men from being homosexual, which I think is what most people do. It's not just, I find this disgusting, it's, we should actively discourage this. Sorry.
Might be another thing, although it's not a very good thing, but still, whatever. In the sense that we already discussed that people think that gays are more riddled with diseases, but part of that could be because of the way the two gay men would have intercourse, and that would be anally, which,
Right.
you know, most guys want to do with women anyway, but in the sense that they might feel like it's gross.
Sure.
That sense, so they might be more riddled with other kind of diseases that one would get from feces.
Yeah. Maybe in kind of seeing two men, you almost imagine, well, anal sex must be involved, and if you're someone who has no experience with anal sex and you think that it's just this extremely messy, disgusting thing, you're just gonna presume that. And it's possible maybe that my attitudes have changed as, say, my attitudes toward anal sex have changed, right? That the behaviors that you would associate with gay sex, suddenly you realize they're not as they're not what you imagine them to be. Yeah, that's fair. It's fair. It might be as simple as that.
That's the only way I thought about it. Because
Yeah.
it can't just be more than just, oh, it's against my religion.
Right. Yeah, and the religious angle to everything. I mean, it seems to explain so much, but I'm always dissatisfied with chalking things up to, oh, religion says it's bad, therefore that's why.
That's why I feel like there needs to be more substance to it. It can't
Yes.
just be because it's against my religion.
I agree. I think that there is something more essential than religion. I think religion, I mean, we can talk about religion as much as you want, but I think that religion is something that was constructed after our psychology was constructed. So in other words, you needed a brain to think about these things before you created the religion. So the brain created religion. So I'm inclined to believe that there is something more ancestral, there's something more essential that came before religion that helps to explain why we put these kind of religious restrictions on same-sex sexual behavior. That religion is really just kind of the middleman in all this, right? Rather than the cause.
Yeah, like I said, there needs to be more substance than just religion.
Oops,
There be
sorry.
some underlying cause.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed the first part of that.
Oh, I was just saying, you can't just be religion. There has to be some underlying cause.
Yeah, I do think that I mean, evolution has not stopped. It's not something that happened to humans and then it stopped. I think that we have evolved with religion. So to some degree, these kind of like base instinctual responses to same-sex behavior may have actually come about as a consequence of religion. But I still think that the religious beliefs were created in the first place because of something more ancestral to the religion itself, something much older than the religion itself. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, any other burning topics that you want to address here, Zypher?
Go-to questions have been answered by people, so I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we've done at least the beginning of this topic justice. I would love to talk about the theories that underlie sexual orientation next week. And there's a lot of good content out there. And the answer, I mean, the reality is there's no solid answer yet to why variation in homosexuality or variation in sexual orientation exists. We don't know why homosexuality exists, why same-sex attraction exists. So next week you can really come prepared with maybe some of your wildest ideas, some of your most interesting ideas. Of course, you know, listen to the lecture first, see what already exists, and then maybe we can build upon it. Because this is a frontier of research. This is something that people don't understand. So there's a lot of opportunity here, a lot of opportunity in this research field. All right. Well, we've both got plenty of work to do, so let's call it here. And remember, one task at a time. That's all you can ever do.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to end the recording here.